Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The BBC presenter scandal may have reached its denouement, as the Metropolitan Police announced this afternoon that it will take no further action. Meanwhile, Vicky Flint, Hugh Edwards' wife, publicly named him as the BBC employee concerned. She announced her husband is now receiving inpatient hospital care, where he will stay for the foreseeable future. However, The Sun revealed this important story, and owing to the Supreme Court's privacy judgment over the BBC's scandalous coverage of the Cliff Richard affair, we have spent the past 5 days in a degree of confusion. And this begs the question, do we have the balance of privacy laws right? Now, in the latest blow to the whinging Remainiac class, figures from the Brexit-hating International Monetary Fund have revealed that Britain's real GDP has outgrown all major European players. Meanwhile, Liz Truss has launched the Growth Commission, and GBNews has the exclusive from the former Prime Minister. And later, I'll be checking my privilege. You can check yours with me, specifically my white privilege, as a new report alleges that schools are pushing children to take unconscious bias tests and are advised to introduce restorative justice by shady third-party organisations. The march of critical race theory through our institutions persists. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by a particularly good panel this evening, the pugnacious former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the socialist and former Labour MP, Stephen Pound. As ever, I want to hear from you. As you know, it's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the news with Rory Smith.
Thank you very much, Jacob. Hugh Edwards has been named as the BBC presenter at the centre of the broadcaster's controversy. In a statement, his wife, Vicky Flint, says Hugh is suffering from serious mental health issues. As is well documented, he has been treated for severe depression in recent years. The events of the last few days have greatly worsened matters. He has suffered another serious episode and is now receiving inpatient hospital care where he'll stay for the foreseeable future. She continued, saying, "In the circumstances and given Hugh's condition, I would like to ask that the privacy of my family and everyone else caught up in these upsetting events is respected. I know that Hugh is deeply sorry that so many colleagues have been impacted by the recent media speculation. We hope this statement will bring that to an end." Well, it comes after the Metropolitan Police say that no criminal offence has been committed by Mr Edwards. The force say they have completed their assessment and are taking no further action. The Met has advised the BBC it can now continue with its own internal investigation. It added that should evidence of criminality or safeguarding issues be identified at any point, matters are to be referred to the relevant police force. The BBC has released its own statement, which reads, "We have seen the statement from the police confirming they have completed their assessment and are not taking further action. We're grateful to them for completing this work at speed." It continues, "The police had previously asked us to pause our fact-finding investigations, and we will now move forward with that work, ensuring due process and a thorough assessment of the facts, whilst continuing to be mindful of our duty of care to all involved." A total of 4 claims have been made towards Mr Edwards. He is accused of paying a teenager for sexually explicit pictures and sending threatening messages to another. A third person alleges the presenter broke lockdown rules to meet them during the pandemic, with a fourth claiming he sent messages to them on Instagram. Mr Edwards remains suspended from the BBC whilst investigations continue. TV, online, DAB Plus radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now, back to Jacob.
This afternoon, it seemed as though the BBC presenter scandal may have been running out of steam. The Metropolitan Police released a statement announcing that there was no information to indicate that a criminal offence had been committed signalling the green light for the BBC investigation to resume. But moments later, Vicky Flynn, the wife of BBC presenter Hugh Edwards, named him as the star involved. She went on to explain that Mr. Edwards is suffering from serious mental health issues and is now receiving inpatient hospital care, where he will stay for the foreseeable future, and she asked for privacy for her family. This was after a day which saw the allegations piling up, with a fourth young person entering this labyrinthine maze, supposedly under 18 years of age, alleging the presenter, now known to be Hugh Edwards, had sent unsolicited messages over a social media platform. Well, joining me now to help us through this labyrinth is GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White, live from New Broadcasting House. Mark, where is the BBC in all this? What do we know that we didn't know earlier on, other obviously than the name of Hugh Edwards?
Well, the BBC, I think, at least is out of this limbo, the inability that they've had really in the last couple of days to crack on and start investigating themselves the slew of allegations that have been made. Now that the Metropolitan Police have confirmed that that first allegation that was splashed in the Sun newspaper last Friday does not pass the criminal threshold. They are not launching a criminal investigation. That frees up senior management here at New Broadcasting House to begin that investigation into Hugh Edwards and his conduct. So although there is no criminal case to answer for Hugh Edwards, it doesn't mean that in the fullness of time that they won't find that there is perhaps a pattern of inappropriate behaviour. We don't know what that investigation or multiple strands to that investigation will actually turn up in the weeks and months ahead.
OK, how's the Metropolitan Police managed to be so quick about this? Normally when my constituents get investigated for something, it hangs over them, even when they're completely innocent of anything, for weeks and weeks and weeks. Well, why has the Metropolitan Police suddenly pulled its finger out in this way?
Well, I mean, I can't answer for them, but they do say that they spoke to the complainant who made that original complaint to the BBC on the 18th of May, a complaint that I think by the BBC's own admission was very slow to be acted upon. They sent an email but got no reply from the complainant, then didn't phone the complainant for another 2.5 weeks. And then after that phone call, according to the BBC, failed to connect, they didn't try to re-establish any contact with the complainant again until the Sun came forward with the allegations. And of course, it was at that point that Hugh Edwards was finally told about the allegations being made against him. So they have definite questions to answer as well. But the Metropolitan Police say that they've spoken to the complainant's family as well. They clearly assessed that information that the Sun newspaper had, and they believe that it doesn't cross this threshold into criminality. Yes, they've acted quite quickly, but thankfully they've acted quickly because at least then the BBC can crack on and start investigating these allegations. I think one other point to add, though, is now that Hugh Edwards' name is in the public, it is certainly possible that other people may come forward and make other allegations. We have no evidence of that, but we were told that the Sun was planning before this set of circumstances was announced with the Metropolitan Police, and then of course the naming of Hugh Edwards. We were told that the Sun was planning to publish fresh allegations tomorrow, so let's see what they do when the papers are published later tonight.
Thank you very much, Mark. We'll have to read The Sun tomorrow and see what they've got for us. But I'm now joined by the former editor of BBC's Question Time, David Keithley. David, thank you very much for joining us. How much of a problem is this for the BBC? Is the BBC unable to investigate itself, to keep control of its employees? I mean, you would have thought after the various scandals it's been through, it would have investigated as soon as it heard about this matter.
I agree entirely, and the problem is, as you say, the BBC has got a long history of form in this domain of not really investigating itself properly, going right back to the Princess Di affair, with the Martin Bashir involvement there. More recently, Cliff Richard, which, as you said earlier, raised the whole massive issues about privacy. And you would think by now that they would have understood that, given their prominence in public life, they need a complaints process that is transparent, is fast, is something that genuinely gets to grips with the facts as quickly as possible. But they just don't seem to be capable of, as I say, coming to grips with that.
Do you think there is a problem at the BBC of the overmighty star, and that the people who manage the BBC are too overawed by the stars who draw in the viewers by their millions, and therefore they can act as they will?
Absolutely. And of course, a classic case in point there is Gary Lineker, where he is continuing to tweet very, shall we say, partisan points on an almost daily basis. The BBC keeps saying this is not what we want, but they seem absolutely incapable of finding an accommodation by which this isn't affecting their reputation. They just seem to think that the presenters are in control, as it were.
And can that change, or is this just the way of celebrity? Do celebrities have this overarching power that people will give in to come what may? We've seen this with actors and actresses and some of those rows too.
And, of course, that is hand in glove with the rise of social media. That means that actors, etc., have got outlets which they can access quickly. But the BBC have been aware of this problem for many years and are obviously in the forefront of the social media domain, as it were. And I'm repeating myself partly, but they do need to find a formula whereby they have got urgent means of fast-tracking complaints so that there is transparency. Maybe there's a case for bringing in an independent element, which at the moment is not the case, so that they are advised from people who are seeing this not just from the BBC bubble, as it were, but through the perspective of licence fee payers.
Well, that's a very good point, David. It's what we've done in Parliament, actually, to try and make sure that that is independent for complaints of issues that relate to abuse of power. But thank you very much, David. Here with me are my panel, former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and socialist and former Labour MP, Stephen Pound. I want to come on a bit later to the freedom of the press issue. But first of all, Stephen, has the BBC failed again? Has its systems simply let complainants down?
I think it's a very interesting point you said earlier on about the Met acting quickly. I think the Metropolitan Police Force have learnt from Carl Beach, they've learnt from U-Tree, they've learnt from some of the ridiculous things that they did and didn't do. There's no evidence to suggest that the BBC has learnt. And I think the problem we have here is organisations like the BBC and, sadly, the National Health Service are so vast, they come to believe their own mythology. They actually believe that they are far greater than, in fact, they really are. Now, the BBC has got a former senior detective from Scotland Yard, Superintendent Jones, supposed to be looking in on this. Now, but at no stage has anybody actually talked about the duty of care to the young men concerned. There are fragile, vulnerable young men involved here. Now, with Hugh Edwards, it's to me a classic, hindsight is a marvellous thing, but we all remember that about a couple of years ago he had all those pictures of himself in the gym, boxing, stripped down, losing weight, and it looked classic midlife crisis to me. There is no good news here, and I think we wish him recovery. We look at the two young men. I very much hope that they can recover, but above all, I think we need to look at the BBC and say, this is our BBC, we're paying for it, what are we getting?
I just want to clarify, you're using men in the ancient Anglo-Saxon and not differentiating between were men and woe men, so they may not be male. Well, Kelvin.
Can you forgive me for that?
I can, but we're just to clarify our use of language. Kelvin, the BBC, grand institution, can't cope with its own stars, fawns over them and doesn't take complaints seriously. Is that a fair?
Well, I think there will be incompetence at the heart of all this and idleness. Right, here comes. After all, they will be receiving a lot of emails, famous people, in television life and in public life, which are wholly and completely untrue. So they see this one, it's just another one. But look, let's just deal with what has happened here. I mean, that's the fundamental. We've had 5 days of big headlines, right? So the Sun made a significant error at the beginning. They did not run the picture, which is running online and which they have seen, and they did not run the name on day one. This then led, there was no question of privacy. This is a major company. The guy is doing an important job. If the viewers knew what was actually going on, they would not view his views of reading the news correctly. But, however, they have come up after 5 days.
Let me ask you about that, actually.
Yeah.
Do viewers care about moral turpitude? Are they thinking, I'm not taking the news seriously because...
Yeah, they do. They do. They're not like politicians who, by the way, look upon everybody as a criminal and as a
including some of their colleagues.
Yes, and many of them are. They look to these people. I'm talking about ordinary people. I'm talking about actually your constituents. They will look upon this as, right, well, this is what happens.
Because I'm interested in this both ways around. First of all, you're saying that to begin with, they put these presenters on a pedestal. They don't just think that is a voice that reads the news.
Well, if you've done 4 decades at it, and you're being paid $450,000 a year, right, of my money, actually they're going to look up and say, well, this is actually. But actually, we're getting away from the main point. The reason this story came out in the first place is because the parents, the mother, the stepfather were upset that £35,000 appeared in their drug-addled son's account, and it came from somebody who they thought was actually in a position of authority.
This is actually the key, isn't it? It's not the morality of it. It's the power imbalance between an oldish chap and somebody who is...
Right, OK, I agree with you. Over the years, morality has moved around a little bit, right? But in this particular case, the parents have a very good point. And what did they do? They went to the BBC, actually, incompetence, stupidity, idleness, nothing happened. They go to the cops and they say, as the cops have said tonight, despite the fact the guy was selling himself for money and all the rest of it, we're not going to do anything. So what did they do? They went to the only other aspect. They went to the Fourth Estate. And yes, this has finally blown it up.
Well, we're going to come back to this. Thank you to my panel. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. Coming up, it's following on the right balance of privacy laws. Oh, and changing from privacy to privilege. Have you checked your privilege? Join me to check mine later. great irony of this story is that the privacy permitted to Hugh Edwards up until now owes itself to another BBC scandal. Back in July 2018, Sir Cliff Richard was awarded over £200,000 in damages from the BBC by a Supreme Court judgment after the broadcaster filmed a South Yorkshire police raid on his home. Sir Cliff was never charged or arrested for the allegations that were entirely false. The Supreme Court ruled that Sir Cliff had, quote, a reasonable expectation to privacy, unquote, and so does the precedent now applies to the current situation. But the question remains, should our free press have been allowed to reveal Hugh Edwards' identity before now? I can't help but think that 30 years ago, The Sun would have had no compunction about revealing the identity. But who better to ask that question to than the man who used to edit The Sun 30 years ago? Kelvin, you would have revealed his name.
I'd have done it in a heartbeat, and there would have been no comeback. And actually, funnily enough, I admire The Sun no end for running with the story and the editor, Victoria Newton. But the clanger they dropped, the biggest clanger, was they didn't have the courage of their conviction and just run it on day one. The story would have been dead in 12 hours.
The problem with privacy, you had to deal with libel laws, and therefore if you were wrong, you had to pay out. But with privacy, you can be right, it can be true, and you still have to pay out, as with the Meghan Markle and the Mail case. And that seems to me to be a fundamental attack on freedom of speech.
Right, and when the Tories are thrown out of office in about 18 months' time in a shocking massacre, you will discover that Labour are more committed to that world than ever before. Leveson 2 and the like will make the tabloid industry impossible, which will please Hacked Off and that kind of guy. And actually, I should imagine Rupert will sell up at that.
And that's very interesting, isn't it, Stephen? Because the Hacked Off group and the left, which are all representative for this evening's purposes.
I don't often talk to Hugh Grant, but I mean, but thank you.
Do you not? No. Have come out really.
He's a bit
and
privileged.
attacked the Sun. Their main source of opprobrium is for the Sun rather than for the BBC. Well,
no, I don't think so. I think there's been a fair bit of mud slung all over the place. But look, Kelvin makes it. I mean, he's absolutely the man who was there, you know, in the belly of the beast. But look, 30 years ago, you could have kept it quiet because social media wasn't anything like it is now. Nowadays, everybody and the dog knew within 25 minutes who they were talking about. These memes were floating around all over the place. So, you know, you can't bolt that stable door now. So the difficulty is how do we actually define legally and in parliamentary terms, which we did, if you remember, when we did the Sexual Offences Act, we talked about if it involved the children of a family, then that breached privacy. The Beckham case. There are a number of cases where we've actually set down the marker, but it hasn't worked properly.
Parliament never set privacy laws. They passed the Human Rights Act, and then the judges have interpreted that. It's very much judge-made law.
Yeah, but the debate we had in the House at the time, I remember specifically, was actually talking about the impact on family and family life, which comes from the human rights legislation.
The kind of story that doesn't get published anymore. So, Premiership footballer, earning a fortune, married, 3 kids, and all lovely pictures, and very quietly having an affair on the side. The Sun then goes to publish it. Immediately, the Premiership footballer goes to the court and gets an injunction stopping this on the basis of, yes, he did do it, yes, there was an affair, but the children will face issues in the school playground, and on that basis, nothing can be published.
It's fundamentally wrong that the newspapers ought to be able to publish things that are true, because, to Stephen's point, everybody knew it was Hugh Edwards over the last few days. They may not have done on day one, but it became more and more publicly known. But nobody was allowed to say so.
A couple of things.
When you say nobody, you're wrong. You're wrong. They could have said so. They could have said so, but they managed to create so much of a feeling that you would either get fined £1 billion or appear in the High Court or something like that. There was no question of privacy.
We had this situation years ago with a thing called a D notice. You remember where?
I remember D notice.
Well, the government could issue a D notice and you couldn't publish it. Now we've got slaps which actually prevent anybody in the Press Act talking about anybody else. And the problem is that we don't have any coherent perspective or analysis of what privacy actually means. Now, my point is that it's almost irrelevant because, you know, it'll be out there. You know, they say a lie can be halfway around the world before the truth has got its boots on. And I think the same thing applies with this. But Whether it's Parliament or whether it's legislation or whether it's judges or whether it's Europe, I don't know. But all I can say is we cannot go on like this. This is an indefensible situation. And I don't think the BBC can go on like this either, but maybe that's another debate.
Well, because in the United States, under the First Amendment to the Constitution, you have an absolute right.
Yeah.
And if you're a public figure, there are almost no protections, even for things that are said about you that are untrue, unless they're malicious. And this seems to me to be fair, that if you've become a public figure, which all three of us are, we don't deserve the same protections as somebody who's never put their head above the parapet, do we?
No, but the United States is now an outlier in this privacy area, you know. I mean, Europe, we imported these privacy ideas basically originally from France.
Which allowed all the French politicians to have mistresses. And
Exactly. So Pompidou, Mitterrand, and also Pompidou, half their...
And Chirac, you know, 10 minuit, 12 compris.
Yeah, so...
And that this actually is very favourable for the rich and the powerful.
I know.
People who want
That's
to
the
behave
point.
badly.
That is the point.
And it stops scrutiny.
Yeah.
It's actually taking away freedom of speech is fundamentally corrupting of the political process.
Well, what's in it for Jane Soap? You know, what's in it for the person at the bottom of the... What's in it for the person who doesn't have access to these expensive lawyers? And that's the problem, because I don't think we have anything like a level playing field here. You can buy... And I have to say, I can think of 2 Premiership footballers, and you probably can come up with the names immediately, who actually should be exposed for what they are, and they won't be, because they have a massive, massive legal team supporting them. What happens about some poor so-and-so who gets done for shoplifting or something, and there's lies are said about their private life? You know, what about the poor woman who died, who drowned in Lancashire? And what defence did she have?
We know this can be serious because we know Robert Maxwell went to law the whole time to stop stories about his corruption being...
Well, he introduced Maxwellisation, where...
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the person we shouldn't forget in this debate, and the person I would like to congratulate tonight, is the mother. That mother was acting, trying to protect her son from somebody famous, wealthy, who she felt was exploiting his weakness for drugs and money. And so it's the mum and the son we should congratulate.
She was in despair.
Thank you. Thank you to my panel. Coming up, remember to check your privilege, and remember that we don't know whether it's a boy or a girl. We may think we do, but apparently we don't. Plus, is it time to relaunch the pro-growth agenda?
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GBNews.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Stays unsettled over the next few days. We'll have showers on Thursday and then rain spreading in for Friday and turning quite wet and windy as we move into the weekend. Last area of low pressure that we've had the last few days pulls away, and then this area of low pressure moves in to end the week and into the weekend, bringing unsettled conditions for all of us. There's still some showers around to end Wednesday, largely across the north and the west. Overnight, the clearest spells across eastern and southeastern parts of England. Elsewhere, still a mixture of showers, and temperatures generally holding up in double figures tonight, generally 11 to 14 Celsius. So it means a mixed start to Thursday morning. There'll be some sunny spells from the word go, but also a scattering of showers. Thursday, as we go through the day, there'll be lots of sunshine in places, particularly across eastern areas. The cloud will bubble up. We could see some showers, but showers should be fewer and farther between compared to recent days. We could still see a few heavy ones, particularly across Scotland, but lots of places staying dry. And it will just feel a little warmer than recent days as a result. Generally high teens to low 20s. Highs around 24 degrees towards the southeast. Into Friday, it all starts to turn more unsettled. Areas of low pressure begin to move in, so we see cloud and rain sweeping in from the southwest, pushing northeastwards. This turning heavy at times, best of the dry weather holding on for longest across Scotland. Temperatures near average.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GBNews.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Tamsin says, whilst I have sympathy for Hugh Edwards and his family, I'm also concerned for the mental well-being of the young people involved in this sad situation. And Chris, we, the public, have a right to know about Hugh Edwards' behaviour. My sympathies lie with his wife and children, but also the parents of the young person too. I think that shows what a fair-minded viewership we have on GB News, so thank you for that. The great Brexit-hating, bureaucratic group-thinking International Monetary Fund has revealed some statistics that it must have found rather painful. The United Kingdom's real GDP has outgrown all European major players since 2010. France, Germany, Spain and Italy. Real GDP is GDP after stripping out inflation. The Romaniac class is intent on convincing you that Brexit has been a disaster, but this is demonstrably untrue. Everything from free trade deals to the Trans-Pacific Partnership to a now booming post-Brexit herring industry disproves this. There's no question we can do more. We must pursue a pro-growth agenda. We must explore our own gas and oil. We must push back, delay our net zero ambitions, and we ought to reverse the corporation tax rise. And incidentally, the former Prime Minister, Liz Truss, launched her Growth Commission today. And GB News' very own business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, was there with her this afternoon. And Liam, you join me now. How did this commission go, and what are the key points you brought out of the presentation today?
Well, former Prime Minister Liz Truss has been keeping an assiduously low profile since last September's mini-budget, which, of course, saw financial markets react badly to her proposals, then Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng's proposals, to freeze taxation rather than raise taxation to try and get their arms around spending and make the state a little smaller. But what she's done now, she's convened a growth commission, a dozen or so pretty high-profile international economists from the UK, US, Japan, India, Latin America as well. She was at the launch of this growth commission this morning. She didn't say much. She let the economists on the stage do the talking. But what they're trying to do, they're trying to reconvene and the ideas that are traditionally associated with the Tory centre-right. High growth, low taxation, supply-side reform. She didn't give any interviews except to me and to GB News. She just said after the commission why the growth commission itself needed to be convened. Here she is, Jacob.
Well, what we've seen for decades is low economic growth, and what that means is people are worse off than they need to be. Today's report shows that they are £10,000 worth off in terms of spending power than people in the United States. And it's, of course, vital that families are able to keep more of their own money, they're able to earn more money to help deal with the inevitable difficulties in life, whether it's inflation, whether it's needing to buy a new car. Having that extra growth is vitally important. So what this commission is looking at is what are the policies needed to get that.
And this is fundamental because we've had no productivity growth in 30 years. Supply-side reforms, deregulation. We were going in exactly the opposite way because the EU is all about more and more regulation. How are we going to break out of this? Are people going to take notice of this commission?
Well, I certainly hope so, because the ideas that this commission are putting forward of low tax, supply-side reform, efficiency in the public and private sector are tested throughout history for broadening prosperity, increasing the size of the pie so there's more for everybody to go round. And it strikes me that while Liz Truss is derided in lots of quarters, the fact is that even though we've since her administration had the so-called adults in charge, the grown-ups back in the room, Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, borrowing costs now for the government are considerably higher than they were at the height of the so-called panic around the time of the mini-budget back in September. So at the moment, we've got the low growth policies, that increase in corporation tax from 19 to 25% that you alluded to, the freezing of tax thresholds, pulling more and more middle-income people into the top rate of tax, taking more people's money away from them so they can't spend it themselves, so the state can spend it. We've got these Hunt-Sunak policies, we've got the slow growth policies, but the fiscal situation is worse than it was now under Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. So I do think, despite the fact that her administration was so short, she has at least given herself permission to be heard.
I think that's right, but I also think you have to acknowledge that getting from here to there will be painful, that when we had the Thatcher revolution, we had to reduce the size of the state. The state's got, what, to 47% of GDP. That is too high, it's bloated, and therefore we need cuts to allow for the tax reductions. We can't just have tax reductions and the devil take the hindmost, can we?
I think you're right, Jacob. Before COVID lockdown, the state was typically 38, 39, 40% of GDP. It rocketed to 52% of GDP during that 2020 lockdown year. But rather than coming back to where it's traditionally been in the UK, it's stuck at about 45, 46, 47%, as if the state has grabbed an extra 5 percentage points of the economy and won't let go. We will need to tackle vested interests. If you want to take an example, for instance, we need to build more houses. That gets growth going. There hasn't been a major economic recovery in this country that hasn't been associated with a big increase in house building, and yet house building is now on its knees. That will upset lots of vested interests. We also need to, as you say, cut back the size of the state, which is always a very difficult thing to do.
Well, it's become more expensive and less efficient. That if you look at productivity in the public sector, it is lower now than it was in 1997, in spite of the introduction of modern technologies, of
email, communications, Zoom,
online renewals of documents and so on. It's worse than in 1997. And we've got to tackle that, which there's no appetite to do, as far as I can tell.
I think it's worth saying, and the economists on the panel today, who included Doug McWilliams, who used to be chief economist of both IBM and the CBI, included Shankar Singham, who's one of the world's leading trade experts, advised governments on both sides of the Atlantic. What they were saying is that we do need to tackle productivity, but this isn't just a UK problem. It's across mainland Europe as well, and even parts of the US where growth has been slow, not least since the global financial crisis. A lot of this, Jacob, is the overhang from the global financial crisis, all the crazy amounts of money that we printed since then, and indeed followed by lockdown. So it's not just a British disease, but Britain should surely be at the forefront of coming up with a new or a renewed economic paradigm of a smaller state, lower taxation. Because after all, what I was thinking, and I was up on the stage today with those economists chairing the press conference, if you like, I was thinking that even though to many journalists and even some parliamentarians, even in your party, what they were saying would seemed a bit radical, what they're actually talking about is policies that the silent majority of British voters, I would say, agree with. The people that run small businesses, the people that want a state that taxes people and is decent and provides minimum levels of social security, but isn't overbearing and too onerous. And I think a lot of people feel that's not where we now are.
That it's gone too far. It needs to be pulled back. The UK needs to lead the way, and we need the deregulatory agenda that allows people to get on with their lives so they can be prosperous.
I think that's right. It doesn't sound like a very fashionable argument, but actually it's an argument that's won throughout history. And I know, for instance, an awful lot of young people I talk to write to me, my role at the Telegraph and at GBNews, they don't like all this high taxation. They don't like all these vested interests that are stopping houses being built. They don't necessarily like the fact that electricity's so expensive, so they can't charge their smartphones.
Because of the net zero agenda. Well, thank you very much, Liam. Coming up, is it right that children as young as 8 years old are being taught critical race theory? Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your mail Moggs. Timothy says, yes to growth, yes to low taxation, a very big yes to the smaller state. And Phil says, Liz Truss is right. Growth is the only way out of this economic disaster. Raising interest rates will just kill the economy for years to come. Yesterday, a report warned that third-party organisations are being brought in by schools to teach young pupils anti-racism theories. The organisation Don't Divide Us investigated 49 third-party organisations that provide courses to children as young as 8 that aim to decolonise their minds. One of the organisations even advocates teaching early years children, which is the period of birth to the age of 5 years old, about racism. The most insidious part of it all is that children are being tasked to take part in tests that check their knowledge of terms like white privilege. One of the organisations, Flair, asked the children to list how well they understood the term in an attempt to apprehend how unconsciously biased the students were. Pupils were also asked to answer how they would approach a situation where a teacher mispronounced a Middle Eastern student's name. Would they, 1, report it to a member of staff, 2, publicly correct the teacher, 3, ask the student how they feel, 4, speak to the teacher about their mispronunciation, 5, do nothing as it's only a mispronunciation. I'm not sure it's a good idea to teach children to correct their teachers in the middle of a class, that surely you need some element of discipline in a class, and setting up confrontation seems unlikely to be the right thing to do, except in the most exceptional circumstances. Don't Divide Us found in its investigation that of the 49 organisations, only 1 provider does not promote critical race theory as being fact in its teaching, despite the fact that critical race theory has been debunked. As Kemi Badenoch said in the past, CRT defines blackness as victimhood and whiteness as oppression, and this is wrong and paints a very bleak and inaccurate picture of social and economic mobility in this country. The report quite rightly flagged that the Education Act requires teachers to make sure that the promotion of partisan views is prohibited. Last year, the government warned schools that where controversial political views are expressed in the classroom, a teacher must offer a balanced overview of opposing viewpoints. A bit like a news channel, really, which is exactly what we're trying to do. And with me now, I'm delighted to be joined by Ken Hines, who believes that children should be aware of their racial privileges. Ken, thank you so much for coming in. Obviously, everyone wants schools to be a place where people are treated equally. But isn't the difficulty with teaching theories and promoting theories that are contentious and aren't proved, and in some cases have been shown to be wrong.
I don't know about theories. I know about, example, my lived experience of going through school. I remember being 14 and it came to pick my subject of what I want to do. And when I told them I want to be an astronaut, I was told by my careers teacher, don't be silly. That's something way beyond you. I said, well, what should I be doing? You more like be a painter or decorator or plumber. So my thing is simply this. Being on the receiving end.
That happened in my own constituency, in a college there that had a terrible Ofsted report a few years ago, where pupils were told not to have ambition. This is a terrible thing, but it's not a race thing, because the people in my constituency were poor but white. And I couldn't agree with you more, that telling pupils not to have ambition is disgraceful. And you want to encourage ambition, but it's not a race issue.
Well, I think that also partly plays. You've got two types. You've got class issues and you've got race issues, and whether underclass. I'm sorry, but, you know, I don't think you've ever experienced that, or from your privileged background, from what I can tell. And my thing is just simply this, you know, when you're on the receiving end, it's a different thing. It's soul-destroying. And my thing is that if race is an element, and it has been shown to be an element, not just in schools, but just through society on the whole, come on, we want to wake up and smell the coffee.
OK, but I think the interesting thing here is the Sewell report, which found in terms of differentials in pay, that though there are differentials in pay by race, actually they were lower in the 1970s, when the UK was ostensibly a more racially divided society, and that therefore these things can't be taken that simplistically.
I don't know about differential in pay. I know in differential in privilege and opportunities. I know this, you know, and it still is. If, like, for example, if you look at the Premiership, we've got so many black players, but very few that makes it to coaches or makes it into the boardroom. How could that be possible? And when we look across the level of society and we see that's reflecting wherever we go, like, for example, even with the police. I'm a community facilitator at Hendon Academy, and I'm talking to the young police officers, the new recruits. And what's happened is many of them have come from backgrounds where they've got no association with the black community. So it's not surprising that when we see these videos that go viral about bad police interaction, what am I supposed to say?
But being in favour of a society that is not racist is not a controversial view. It's a question of whether these theories that are being taught are the right thing, and particularly with critical race theory, which obviously emanates from the United States. What was that trying to do? I think this is important. The founder of it, Richard Delgado, said that critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law. The desire for deconstruction rests on the claim for America, that America is fundamentally based upon white supremacy. But this isn't actually true, is it? Because you see in America that people of Asian background have done enormously successfully and are consistently now outperforming people from a white background.
Well, and again, I won't be... That's not too similar to what happens probably here. But the simple fact is that what we found, when you, particularly in the black community and the black race, since we were subjected to such disproportionate violence, that, you know, it doesn't surprise me that we are much more traumatized by...
But in America, this is also true of the Asian community, particularly the Chinese and the Japanese were actually interned during the Second World War. So it's not the case that the Asian community was enormously well treated historically, but it is now able to outperform on a meritocratic basis. And isn't that where society should be?
Let me say this much. The Second World War lasted, what, approximately 6 years? Slavery lasted over 400 years. So how can you try to have a balance to say that this is what it is?
To this country, not in this country, because post the Mansfield judgment, it was clear that there was no concept of slavery in England, and from the middle of the 18th century.
I think you're very much mistaken, because if we look at what they did in the Caribbean and how it still afflicts not only the Caribbean, Caribbean, but also Africa, the legacy still continues.
We were the first country in the world to outlaw slavery.
Maybe so, but I won't be surprised. Your family has got connection through slavery.
Well, I'd be very surprised. You have no evidence of this.
Well, I'm saying, I won't be surprised. But then again, I might do a bit of deep delving just to
Well,
confirm or
as far as
deny.
I'm aware, my family has no connection with the slave trade. But the UK's record on slavery was that we were the first country in the world that slavery was an aspect of the Ottoman Empire right until its very end.
I think no, but I tell you what I can blame the British for: industrialising slavery. This is what my thing is.
And we didn't.
I don't know.
Portuguese traded more people than we did. Souls were traded more by the Portuguese than by us. I'm afraid we're going to have to end, unfortunately. But Ken, thank you so much. We'll have to cut back in and continue this conversation. That's all from me. Up next, it's the great Professor Mark Dolan in for the other great Professor, Dan Wootton. Mark, what have you got tonight?
Well, Jacob, when it rains, it pours, and we now have the name of the BBC star at the heart of this alleged sex scandal. Hugh Edwards, the face of the organisation, the face of BBC News. Now, we wish him well. He's in hospital, receiving treatment for mental health issues, but many questions to be asked about his conduct and the handling of this by our national broadcaster, the BBC. It's a Beebing Crisis special, and we have our man, Hugh Edwards, has been named.
Well, that's very important, and it is a big issue for the BBC. That'll be coming up after the weather. I'm back tomorrow from 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. It'll be sunny in Somerset, and let's hope we win the match at Taunton.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Stays unsettled over the next few days. We'll have showers on Thursday and then rain spreading in for Friday and turning quite wet and windy as we move into the weekend. Last area of low pressure that we've had the last few days pulls away, and then this area of low pressure moves in to end the week and into the weekend, bringing unsettled conditions for all of us. There's still some showers around to end Wednesday, largely across the north and the west. Overnight, the clearest spells across eastern and southeastern parts of England. Elsewhere, still a mixture of showers, and temperatures generally holding up in double figures tonight, generally 11 to 14 Celsius. So it means a mixed start to Thursday morning. There'll be some sunny spells from the word go, but also